Good afternoon all, and welcome. I'm Murray Thompson, Head of ProShare, and it's really good to see so many names and so many familiar faces on the attendee list today. Thank you all very much for joining this webinar, ProShare's first of the year, and today we will be looking at the many issues and considerations a company might have when communicating a global share plan. Before we start though, there are a few housekeeping points I need to run through. So firstly, to ensure that there is no background noise, we have muted all delegates and we switched off all cameras too, other than for the panel. And I should also point out now that this session is being recorded. If you have a technical problem, if you can't hear, for instance, or can't see, please use the chat box to notify us, and Jess and Nikki will do their best to assist. We're very keen to cover as many questions that you may have, and as many as we can, and we will do this during the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. So please do feel free to make use of the Q&A box. You can post your questions at any time during the webinar. You don't need to wait until the very end. And I believe you should also have the option to click the anonymous button if you don't want your name to be attributed to your question. And as I say, yeah, we will try to answer as many of these as we can in the time we have left at the end. So, communicating a global share plan. In the cases featured today, we have two brand new global plans launched in the midst of a global pandemic. If you've got all of that to consider, and if you've gone to the effort of speaking with your advisors and administrators and finance and the COSEC team and HR and group reward and compliance teams around the world, and you've finally been given the green light to go ahead and launch your new plan, the very last thing you want to do is make a hash of your comms. So with that in mind, let me introduce our hosts from Eximia and our guests from Ocado Group and Kingfisher. Now, Chrissy Davis, I'm sure familiar to many of you, she's the founder of Eximia and also a fellow chartered secretary. She's worked in share plans for more than 15 years now, 7 of which were in-house at various listed companies before she transformed herself into the communications champion we know today. Graham Cook is the head of communications, and he's been with Eximia for over a year now. Before that, Graham worked for over 10 years with household names such as Microsoft and BT with their internal communications and internal engagements. And our guests today are Melanie Keegan, who is the Global Share Plan Manager for Ocado Group. Mel has been at Ocado for a year now, and wow, what a year, and has worked in share plans for well over 10 years. Now, the share plan that Ocado, launched was their first to be specifically aimed at non-UK employees. It's a 2-year global share purchase plan, which offers a 10% discount and was offered to 900 colleagues across 7 countries. And our second guest is Alison Burstall, Group Reward Director at Kingfisher, where she has been for the last 4 years. And prior to that, Alison was at De Beers for 12 years. And for those who may not know, Kingfisher brands include B&Q and Screwfix here in the UK, and many more such as Castorama and Brico Depot in Europe. Other than a small exec discretionary plan, this was Kingfisher's first plan outside of the UK. It takes the form of a global share purchase plan with a generous 1-for-1 match and was offered to a whopping 77,000 colleagues across 14 countries and territories. So, right, okay, I've set the scene for what I'm sure will be a fascinating conversation, and I'll be back a little later for the Q&A session. So, without further ado, let me hand over to Chrissy and Graham from Eximia.
Thanks, Murray, for the great introduction, and we'll press on and start with really the why these plans were set up, and particularly in the backdrop of 2020. So, global share plans have obviously been popular for decades. But it's interesting to speak to those that have decided to launch in 2020. So first, I'll turn to you, Mel. What made you and Ocado decide to launch your global plan in 2020?
Well, Chrissy, at Ocado, we've got a very strong employee share ownership culture. And the growth that we've experienced in the share price over the past 5 years has meant that our all-employee share plans in the UK are very popular. And then following rapid global expansion that we've experienced over the past 2 years, we could see that we were going to be at a point mid-year in 2020 where 5% of all of our employees would be outside of the UK. So it really was just wanting to make sure that those employees outside of the UK had the same opportunities as our UK employees.
So it's all about sort of positioning for growth and being prepared, and certainly when we come out of the other end of this pandemic, then you'll be in a culturally strong place for all employees participating in a plan. So that's great. And likewise, I guess I'll pass over to Alison as to what made you decide to launch a global plan to 77,000 colleagues back in 2020.
Believe me, I've asked myself many times what made us launch to 77,000 people in the middle of a pandemic. Look, I think for us it was a fairly obvious story. We had a new CEO join about 14, 15 months ago. Over the first 12 months, he developed a new strategy, our Powered by Kingfisher strategy. He spent a lot of time talking with investors. Investors were very clearly focused on ESG and responsible business. And therefore we were actually in an amazing position where I was backed by the board, the chairman and the CEO, all of which just fundamentally thought it was the right thing to do to give our colleagues an opportunity to be part of the new Kingfisher journey, a link to the new strategy.
Absolutely. I think inclusivity is certainly the key topic over the past year. So it's definitely positioning you well for future. So okay, we'll dive into the theory, some of the theory of comms, but it's very much conversational between us as we go through. So we're going to cover off 8 key tips to delivering a successful communication plan globally. So we'll go through these one by one, and I will pass over to Graham to go and cover the first one.
Yeah, well, I just before that, Chris, I was just going to say I didn't want to start on a downer. I just want to emphasise the point that if you don't already know, it's actually far easier to miss the target with your comms than to actually get it right. And there's a good reason for it. When you think about, you're trying to get a message to land and you're trying to promote a global share plan, we're up against a whole host of information that's bombarding our audiences. And then on top of that, you've got a number of different challenges, such as your objectives and what you want to achieve with share plans. That's completely different from other people's goals and concerns. Then with global plans, you've got people working at different times, you've got language barriers, culturally, there are things that don't always translate from country to country. So to make sure we give ourselves the best chance of getting our message to cut through that noise and build a positive culture around share plans, we put together, like Chrissy said, these top tips for delivering a successful global comms campaign. And we start off with one, which is be mindful it's change. I think many of us think change comms is just about companies explaining reorganizations, mergers, acquisitions, but actually the majority of employee comms are change comms, and share plans in that are absolutely no different. You're presenting something brand new to people, and then they've got a decision to make. That's going to impact them, it's going to impact their families. So to give people the best experience, we need to consider how our minds work, and then we can work with the brains and not against them. Now, actually, we do a presentation about how the brain works and how we can work with it. But without getting too deep into the neuroscience, I want to make 2 points. First point, there are a number of different areas in the brain that are doing and looking for different things. But ultimately, it's like having 2 opposing characters in our heads. One that wants to try new things and the other is really afraid of change. What we need to do is excite the positive side and appease the negative. The second point is that our brains are trying to save as much energy as possible. They prefer to go into what you call autopilot, meaning they're hardwired to reject the change. So think of when you get, and it explains the photograph, think of when you get a new phone. There's always that annoyance about learning where everything is, particularly when you move from one brand to another. How you download apps, where are your contacts, how you take a photograph. And there's always a bit of us thinking, oh, just give me the old phone back. I'm far more comfortable with it. But if you stick with it, it's going to be better in the long run because you're excited about the new functionality of your phone. So because you believe it's better for you, you're going to stick with that uncomfortable feeling of the change. So that's why we need to make sure our people feel excited about the share plan or the change in the existing platform that you're presenting.
So I think the key takeaway there is to have empathy, be mindful of everything else in the bigger picture. And I guess that's particularly important in the current circumstances, that we've got a lot more to contend with, a lot more change. Yeah, whilst we may be excited about our share plan, it's about giving people particularly more time to digest it and make the right decision for them. So I'd say time is actually quite a key part of the communication campaign, and allowing a bit of room in there for people to just digest and yeah, make the right decision. And I guess we can all relate to the change over the phone, and something as an analogy for share plans is migrating from one platform to another. We know the features are great, but actually we're still asking people to go and register, go log in and become familiar with the new interface. And I know that's something, Mel, you're going through right now, and you've really paid great attention to how you communicate that and supporting your colleagues through that transition. So
absolutely, yeah. When you've had a platform that you've been using for a number of years and people have got used to it, I think there's enough complexities around share plans themselves that the last thing you need on top of that is the complexity of a new platform. So we've been really good, I think, at going out early and telling people what to expect from the new platform and being enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that wraps us up nicely on sort of being mindful of change and having empathy to who we're trying to communicate to our colleagues. So we'll move on to the second top tip, and that is around considering what's the point. So I'll pass over to Graham.
Yeah, so I was actually a journalist by trade, and I was a journalist for 3 years. And when I was in that role, a model that was drilled into me from day one was something called the inverted pyramid. And although the inverted pyramid is primarily for writing news stories, the principle for all comms is the same. Basically, it's to get the key information, so that's the who, what, where, why, how, into your communications as soon as possible. So try and stop yourself from delivering information as you would when you're writing a traditional story. So you've got a start, a middle, and end, with the most important bit of information at the end. People won't get to that information if you take too long to get there, which is why journalists will get the who, the what, the where, and the how in the first couple of sentences in a news story. And as communicators, we need to make sure we also address the why, and that's often forgotten. Why are we driving this message? What's in it for the employees? Make it clear as quickly as possible why they should care about it, what's in it for them, and work on the premise people are going to glance at your message and move on. So if that's the case, what is it you want them to take away? And then you get that into your first few sentences.
Thanks, Graham. So yeah, I think we all, as share plan gurus, we always focus on our objectives and what we want out of it, but then it's turning that to making sure that that's really clear and comes across to our colleagues. So I think in both campaigns, actually, with Kingfisher and Ocado, did fantastic jobs of putting that first and foremost. And we're very functional about saying what it is, when it is, etc. But we don't always cover off the why. Why do we have a share plan in the first place? So I'll pass over to Alison first, I guess, to sort of elaborate on the fact that you put your CEO sort of front and centre stage to launch the initiative.
Yeah, we actually went further than that. Actually, we were talking about what we called the plan, and we eventually called the plan the 1+1 sharing in our future plan. It's a bit corny, I appreciate, but actually it did really anchor what we were trying to do. So to Graham's point, really getting to the point, and the whole point of the plan from a colleague perspective was that we fundamentally believed it was the right thing to do to give colleagues the opportunity to share in the future of Kingfisher, particularly linked to the new strategy. And you're right, Chrissy, we did that in a number of ways, not just with the name of the plan, but a lot of the front end of our comms was delivered by Thierry Garnier, the CEO. He was really passionate and still is incredibly passionate about share ownership across the organisation, and he talks very well about what his vision is for Kingfisher and what his vision is for share ownership and what he thinks that can bring us. So we were very lucky. Our reason for delivering share plan, though, was also very solid, because it was just fundamentally it's the right thing to do, and that helped very much with the with getting to the point very quickly for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think introducing the campaign video from the CEO is a really powerful, communication tool there to harness. So, and passing over to you, Mel. I know we obviously helped with producing the brochure that you see in front of us. but you certainly managed to get your CEO on board as acting as that champion for the plan.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think to build on also on what Graham was saying, it's the why. And with why, you know, when the employees have a brochure land on their desk, it's not so much why do we want you to join the plan, it's why do we even want you to read this brochure? Why is that important? And so right at the front of that brochure, we were telling them exactly why. And it really was because at Ocado, we want the employees to have the potential to benefit in the growth of the business. So that was our starting point, and it worked. I thought it worked really well.
And we'll allude to that part later. So yeah, that's brilliant. So next on our list is keeping things snappy.
Yeah, so as well as sort of making your point, a great skill you want to learn is try and minimize the words needed to get there. So remember, less words equals maximum impact, something we talk about in Eximia quite a lot. So keep asking yourself, what words are you able to lose from your communications? So it's a good example there from Ocado, keeping it snappy, but we've written an example here where we've reduced a sentence about a government review of capital gains tax, taking it from 186 words, which you can see there, it's all grammatically correct and the information is accurate, but we've taken it to 48 words. So it skips to the important stuff, and it's much more likely to be read and then retained by the majority of people if you can write in this way. I also think there's a fear that people have that something with few words won't be taken seriously, but honestly, it's the complete opposite. That the best communicators can take the minimum amount of time to make their point. Well, this is something that you will need to work on over time with every communications you write, every presentation. You start trying to make positive changes now, and then in time you'll do it without even thinking. Personally, if I'm writing something, I'll still write my top of mind thoughts, and then a bit like a carpenter or an ice sculptor, you start shaving off the excess as much as possible. And what you want to be left with is something really punchy at the end. But everyone's got their own way. It's about finding what way works for you, but the aim should be try and cut down the text and the presentations that you do.
So we all need to become sculptors. I think it's always a tricky one when you're dealing with sort of legal financial topics. You've got to have some confidence to feel that you can condense that. But it goes to show here with the CGT example that with a bit more focus and attention and keep putting it down and picking it up afresh, you can actually simplify it. And there's a real art form in simplifying it. So yeah,
I think even if you start with something as simple as the word that, I've talked about this lots of times, but I was told this when I was a journalist in radio. I was writing scripts and I kept using the word that, and the guy said, look, just take the word that out, read the sentence. If it still makes sense, leave it out. I would say about 90% of the times I used to use the word that, I can get rid of now. So even a simple thing like that can start condensing your documents down.
It's surprising, once you've got an eagle eye for this, you notice it all over the place, but we all fall into traps and habits, and it's just about kind of keep reinforcing that. And it's not only good for share plans, but just good for everything in terms of communicating if we're trying to influence people and making decisions, etc. And it's a really good art form to have. So
one thing actually helps is this next point, Chrissy, get more eyes on it. The more people you ask about how you can cut things down, the better. So as well as making sure you've set up a virtual team, so you have the best set of skills to carry out a project, never be too proud to ask people's opinion at all levels of the business, in related and unrelated departments, what you're going to communicate, whether that's written or a presentation. At Eximia, we do this every day. As a team, we'll work in multiple sprint sessions to talk through content, and we do that with our clients like Ocado and Kingfisher. That's because I think if you've looked at something for so long, it's easy to stop seeing the mistakes, or you misjudge how a message is going to be perceived by others. So get more eyes on what you're doing, and you're less likely to send out something that's going to have a negative impact on your employee engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think coming from a COSEC background, running share plans in-house, I know that we're very pedantic. We do a lot of check-in. But I think the key thing is certainly communicating a global plan is to make sure you've got diversity of thought. So making sure you've got a team that you can rely on globally to get their eyes on it, because everyone looks at things differently, and different cultures, etc., will have different opinions on whether that's imagery, use of words. And I know, Alison, you've got a great example here I think everyone could relate to on the call.
Yeah, and I think because Graham reviewed a document for me recently and must have removed about 30 that's within about 10 minutes. So so I'm now really attuned to that thing. Yeah, we thought we were doing a really good job of acting right, and a great extent we had core launch team, we had local launch teams, but we were really mindful of the impact of COVID. We were extremely lucky. We were in a retailer. We were open, but it's difficult to trade. And for a lot of what I would call more technical design was done in the centre, as you would expect. We knew we had to launch a Phantom in China, Vietnam, and bizarrely Jersey. And we made a decision up front that we didn't want to use the word Phantom. We thought that was a very sort of SharePlan's technical word. It wouldn't really make sense. So we kicked it around quite a lot, around quite a big group of people, to be honest. And we came up with the alternative of Shadow, which we quite liked. It seemed to work. Everybody liked it. It translates okay. So we were good to go. I then happened by chance to show something to the CEO. The CEO had spent quite a lot of time in China. He had a massive allergic reaction to the concept of using Shadow. Unbeknown to us, Shadow translates directly to ghost and directly to death. It's not a word that you should be using in China. And therefore that at 2 weeks to go before launch left us with 200 translated assets with the word Shadow in it, which we had to get rid of. It was fine, but it's not what you want to do 2 weeks before launch. We eventually came up with the word mirror. It works as well, but it was a massive lesson to me around you do need to get as many eyes on things as you possibly can early.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and especially in a global context, as you say, Alison, you've got multiple versions with different translations, etc. So these minor changes actually, ends up opening a good couple of hundred files to make those edits and exporting again. So it can be time consuming. So and Mel, I know you had an example here around involving your CEO and your comms team having a different opinion.
Absolutely, and this is, I agree with this one so much, Chrissy. Absolutely, get more eyes on it. So we were in a situation with the launch of our plan. We were a couple of weeks away from launch, and we were told quite late on a Thursday evening that we were likely to go into a prohibited period the following Tuesday, and if we wanted to launch, it would be the Monday, or be at a later stage, a date unknown to us. So absolutely, we went for the Monday. Why not? And we took our timetable and we changed the days to hours, and we made sure that we got everything lined up to go out on the day. So as a result of that, on the day of the actual launch of the plan, we were going to have the brochure completely finalised by 10:30 a.m. It was going to go to internal comms for approval by 11:30, go out to our local people partners by 12:30 to let them take a look, and then go out to our participants at 1:30 and get everything done on the day it needed to be done. A slight spanner in the works was that our internal comms department came back and said, you absolutely cannot use an image of the CEO, nor can you use a quote from the CEO. This is a brochure. This is not what we do at Ocado. And we just felt that it really was the right thing to do, because our CEO is absolutely passionate about employee share ownership. And in fact, when we had our kickoff meeting to design the new international plan, he attended the first meeting, which I think is quite unusual. So we weren't entirely sure what to do. And we decided there was only one option really, and that was to take the brochure to the CEO. Clearly, he's very busy. He's someone whose diary gets booked up way in advance, and he absolutely does not approve our internal comms. But we just thought it was so important to us that we had him on that brochure that we wanted to do it. So we went off and sent it to the CEO and asked him what he thought. And to be honest, he came back in less than 5 minutes and said, absolutely, please use my image and use my quote and go for it. it was great going back to internal comms and saying it's okay, we've spoken to Tim, he's given us the go ahead. And I do honestly think it was a good thing to do. So in our case, really, it was just getting 2 more eyes on it. But rather than just have internal comms push back and say, no, you can't do it, we just felt it was the right thing to do.
That's how you challenge the process, Chrissy.
Yeah, absolutely. To link a plan and get the strategy, which the CEO is obviously there to drive. So linking all of that up is key. So if we move on to tip 5, and that's be a jargon buster and translator.
Yeah, so this is something we're very, very passionate about, and that's being jargon busters at Eximia. If you've been in any industry for long enough, there's going to be terms and phrases that you forget not everyone understands, and share plans is absolutely no different. So vesting, dividends, SIPs, I could go on, you know them all. There's so many words that most people outside of the share plan world actually don't understand. So we need to do our best to either use words that most people will understand, or at least, if there's no way around it from a legal point of view, provide definitions in your comms so people can follow along with the communication. Because the last thing we want is for people to feel stupid and embarrassed to say that they don't understand something. Because if they feel this way, they're going to completely disengage from your campaign. And one last point I'd like to make on this: don't fall into the trap of thinking people in certain positions in a company with certain roles should know what terms mean. And I know directors of huge organizations that get really lost in share plan technical terms. So keep challenging your content and find ways to be a jargon buster.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Graham. I think we've obviously turned a lot of attention to the all employee plans, but even with the discretionary exec plans, you know, I've quite often, when I was in-house, heard that they're intelligent people, they can handle this, but actually they're topic experts in their field. They're also very time deprived people, so it's good to still make sure that we make that content really accessible. And I know there's a fear of taking and moving too far away from plan rules. I think there's a time and a place for putting the right terminology into the mix, so that if they looked at the plan rules, they could still understand it. But there's a time and a place, and I guess if we do have it in there, as we have with this example with Ocado, we've got the trucks, and we're pulling out key terms so that people can really understand and follow the communication through. So Mel, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
I do, Chrissy. I think it made such a difference on this brochure to have almost that kind of glossary on the same page where the terms were used. So often you find that you have to turn to the back page to get to the glossary, which you kind of almost lose your place, especially when you're reading technical things that you don't necessarily understand. But you could see on our brochure, on the one page, we were explaining what a transfer of shares was, or what exercising an option was. And then it was a few pages later that we were explaining what an insider is, because it related to that page. So I think that really made a difference on our brochures, is putting those explanations in there, but putting them on the page that they related to.
Absolutely, it's such a good point. And in the art of design, we always talk about user experience, and it's about stepping into the shoes of that person looking at that piece of communication. So in this instance, a brochure, work through it, and if you're reading a piece of terminology, you know, like vesting for the first time, there's nothing worse of flipping to the back of the brochure to think, what does that mean? Now I come back here, you're jumping from one area to the other, so that's key. Oops, and as I do, I jump from one side to the other, always good. Yeah, and turning our attention, I guess, to Alison, you focused on sort of being the jargon buster and really making sure you explained every aspect of it. So yeah, if you could elaborate on your efforts.
Yeah, we ran some focus groups before we launched the plan across the group, just to see what people's interest was and what people would be concerned about, and we got it loud and clear. You've got to simplify this, you've got to get rid of the share plan jargon, otherwise you won't bring anybody along with you. And I think because we were launching to 77,000 people, the very vast majority of which are store colleagues who perhaps had never owned shares or never even thought of themselves as being share owners, we felt it was really, really important. So we actually didn't shy away from changing the language. We got rid of anything to do with vesting. We got rid of anything to do with exercise. I've already talked about the whole phantom issue. And we really, really made a huge effort to get rid of the normal share plan language and to translate that into something that made a little bit more sense for people. But for a number of reasons, partly around the group of employees that we employ, but also partly because this had to be translated. We were operating across 14 different countries and territories, and we had a huge amount of complexity in the translation. The other thing that we did, which I think helped us, was our core team, our launch team, was not a share plans team. I mean, clearly we had a share plan manager involved, but the majority of people in that core team were not share plan experts. And so in some ways that served us quite well. I started off perhaps a little bit nervously about launching a big plan like this without the internal expertise, but in a lot of ways it did us a huge favour, because we didn't accidentally fall into well, this is vesting and this is exercising and sell to cover and all of those kind of things, because a lot of people in the core team just didn't know what those things meant. So I wouldn't necessarily, if you are doing this across a group of people, I wouldn't necessarily shy away from having inexperienced share plan people on your core team, because it served us well.
Absolutely, I completely agree, and it's a bold move, but an effective one. So yeah, I think it certainly helps you tackle those. We've had it with new team members where they say, vesting, what's vesting? So it's challenging that and saying, do we actually have to use this? So yeah, I think they're great examples. So and this moves us nicely into tip 6 is about simplifying the complex. So I'll come back straight to you, Alison, actually, just saying, I guess this example is very much Kingfisher around having calculators for people to interact with, animated videos to tell some of the story in video format. We've got a poster on the right with the timeline, so we're visualising as much as we can to make that the digestion of information a lot easier. So yeah, Graham, I guess there's some theory behind this, so I'll pass over to you first.
Well, yeah, if you follow the steps 1 to 5, what we've talked about, you've actually gone a long way at achieving this point of simplifying the complex. And this is what all great communicators and leaders do. And the better you can do this, the more likely people will then want to engage with you. So in a nutshell, if you put those people most in need of clear and concise messages, if you put those people at the heart of your comms, everyone benefits. There's no losers. So that's why we try to deliver communications in bite-sized chunks, and if it's possible, visualize lengthy explanations or often processes to make it easier for people to understand. So if they can visually see a roadmap, hopefully it will make more sense.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think Kingfisher did a fantastic job of this, of breaking it down and mixing up the learning experience. So you're going from watching a video, you're then reading some text, you're interacting with a calculator and the modeler. So you're keeping your interest as you go through. So yeah, Alison, I don't know if you've got anything to sort of elaborate on your experiences there.
Thanks, Chrissy. Yeah, I guess I described it a bit as an onion. The reality is you have to have complex comms. There are, there are rules, there are terms and conditions, and you can't shy away from those. You have to get those in. You have to get those in your entirety. But I certainly didn't want people to be hit with that first up. So we developed what became known as the onion, which was the front end of which, as Chrissy's just shown, was quite high level. It was videos from Thierry Garnier. It was really concentrating on what are the core questions that you need to think about, and we limited that to 3, which is, what does it mean to be a shareholder? How does this plan work? And very key for us, is this plan right for me? Is it right for each colleague? And then we had layers of different detail underneath that, because we recognise that some people would want more visual approach, some people would want to be able to work it through on a calculator, some people would actually want to see a narrative where they could step through everything. So the beauty of having everything housed on a microsite is that it allowed us to position all of that information, from the the very simple to the very detailed, in a way that that colleagues could look at as much or as little of that information as they actually wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you've hit the nail on the head, really. People want differing amounts of information. Some will just look at the high level and say, I'm in, I want to join. So you've got to cater for those, and then those that want to delve into the legals and the financials to really understand it in more depth. And you did that fantastically on your campaign.
Well, one of the other really important things, sorry, Chrissy, one of the other really important things I think is if you are translating across a lot of languages, then the more simple you can make your assets, the better. It is an absolute nightmare. We had well over 200 assets in the long run, and when you're making small tweaks, and then that just pushes out across multiple assets, it is really tricky. So there are real administrative benefits as well of keeping stuff really tight and really clear for the core team, let alone the colleagues themselves.
Absolutely. I think just to add to that is saying simplifying the complexity is having a really good asset matrix. So it was a good spreadsheet of saying what countries getting what. You've obviously got to mitigate the risk of making changes and not making them across all of the assets. So yeah, a good strong project management and a good asset matrix to make sure that you're keeping a clear track of what's changed, what hasn't changed, etc. So you've got that kind of audit trail. So yeah, and I'll pass over to Mel on this, because I know you put a lot of effort into being on virtual calls like this all around the globe for your colleagues. So I'm sure that helped simplify the complex and enabled them to ask questions direct to you. So yeah, if you'd like to tell us a bit more about that.
Absolutely. And I think that was just knowing how our colleagues in different countries wanted us to communicate with them. So everyone had the same access to our platform to apply to join the plan. Everyone received the brochure, but at that point we had to stop and say, right, what do our colleagues in this country want us to do now? It was never going to be a case that we just stopped there. There was always going to be more communication, and most were quite different. So if we take, for example, Bulgaria and Sweden, in those countries, they are used to having regular town hall meetings. They're very well attended, they're very well contributed to, and it's a chance for everyone to ask questions about all things Ocado related. So they asked me to attend those. The employees that we have in those countries work in technical development. So they like a bit of the technical side of things, and they want to ask technical questions. They absolutely didn't need the plan explained to them. They'd seen the brochure, but they wanted to ask about things like, how is the foreign exchange rate going to work, and how is the tax going to work, and that type of thing. So I attended those town halls and answered as many questions as I could with some follow-up emails. Poland was a little bit different. In Poland, they like to use Google Sheets for things like this. So a Google Sheet was actually opened. All of our colleagues in Poland were given the opportunity to go and write a question on that Google Sheet. We asked them to do it in English, which they kindly did, because my Polish is not good. They were given until it was like 1 o'clock on a Thursday. The sheet was closed. I then went in and posted all of my answers. We opened it again for a second round of questions. And in that way, I think we barely got any emails asking questions from Poland, because people had visibility of other people's questions, and pretty much everything was covered, you know, from what happens if I leave, what happens if I go on maternity leave, to what happens if the pound strengthens. It was all covered in that way. It was very, very different over in the US and Canada. In the US and Canada, our employees over there have not necessarily been exposed to share plans before, or to shares at all. And they weren't comfortable asking questions about the plan. They just wanted to know what it was and how it worked. And so what they asked me to do over there was just set a few time slots in each country where I did a presentation going really, really back to the basics and explaining what a share was, how a share plan works. It was open to questions, but we didn't get too many questions. Because I think people were just digesting the information that they were getting. Those sessions were recorded, so they could go back and have a look at them at a later stage. But I know that if I had tried to do something like that, say in Bulgaria, I think people would have lost interest because they wanted to get to the more technical side of things. So it was really just knowing how to follow up that brochure with the kind of the live communications, I guess, in a way that the country specifically wanted to see them.
I think that takes us on to the next point, doesn't it, Chrissy? Really, it merges across into
Yeah, absolutely.
knowing your audience.
Yeah, know your audience.
It's because actually this would, myself and Chrissy were having a chat before, and we'll talk. This is probably the most important thing to do is know your audience. So the onus shouldn't be on your people to work out your message. It's for everyone. It's for all of us to think about who we're communicating to, and deliver something that's best for them, like Mel was talking about, delivering something that's best for that group of people, that country, that culture. So ask yourself, do people suffer from colour blindness in the team? Does everyone have access to emails? Is English everyone's preferred language? Do we have to have translations? Is any of your colleagues not able to listen to videos with volume? Some people could be hard of hearing. Some people may not be able to, maybe on the move, and won't be able to watch their videos with volume on. So have they been subtitled? You need to find out as much about your audience, your people, as you can, so you know what content they want, you know what format it should be in, and delivered in the best channel for them. And every business, every team, everyone's different. There's no team's the same, and it constantly evolves as well. So you've got to keep carrying on these surveys, asking questions, looking at the data behind your channels, see what works. Look at click-through rates, visits to microsites, and then after a campaign, test your audience again. Because the more you know your people, the better chance you have of coming up with the perfect channel mix for your comm strategy. Because there's so many channels you can choose, but you could spend a lot of money on innovative techniques and different approaches. But actually, if it's not fit for purpose and it's not fit for your audience, then actually it's a complete waste of money. So knowing your audience is key. Yeah,
absolutely. So yeah, there are a lot of channels to choose from, and it's easy just to focus on those, but laying the foundations by understanding who you're speaking to and what they particularly want really does help. And I think in both campaigns and instances, for you, Mel and Alison, you did fantastic jobs in going out and finding out what people wanted. So Alison, I'll turn to you. I know you did a lot of work around building a really good, strong team internationally, but also asking a lot of questions and laying the foundations.
Yeah, we did. I think one of we had a team, as I said before, that was a core launch team centrally, but we worked really hard with local launch teams. We knew with 77,000 people, we weren't going to be able to get to everybody directly, and language prohibited us doing that from the central team. So we spent probably 8 weeks upskilling every day the local launch team, so that they were in a good position to be able to deal with things locally. One of the interesting things I think about launching a plan like this in the backdrop of a pandemic is that some of your normal communication channels are not available to you anymore. So a lot of the things that we would normally rely on, like things that happen in the office, being able to get people together, the conversations that automatically happen around the water cooler, those kind of things, all of those things just weren't there anymore. So we had to work perhaps a little bit harder, or think perhaps a little bit more laterally than we normally would. We had a number of issues, not least of which probably 95% of our colleagues don't have email addresses. So to get to 77,000 people is tough and expensive and time consuming, hence building the microsite so that we could get information in one go. And I guess back to the point I made earlier, this idea of the onion and the layers and layers and layers of different information using different sources. So using narrative, using pictures, using animation, using video. We also ran, as Mel did, lots of Q&A sessions. Lots that we developed, what we call a manager's huddle sheet, but a sheet for managers to go through with their teams during their normal team sessions. And I think for us it was about, we knew we had big problems. We knew our audience for sure, but we knew we also had problems with the fact that they were so disparate, multiple language issues, and that we weren't going to be able to get there. But for us that was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to try new things. if it hadn't been for the pandemic, we probably wouldn't have given all the animations and the videos and all that kind of thing a go. So it was a really good and welcome opportunity to try things a little bit different. And I don't think we should be scared of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think whilst we're focused on the fact about being digital first, I think that you've touched on a really good point there of knowing that you can have a good mix between the print and the digital, and knowing the place for print. And actually, you took a really good approach in making sure that there was enough information in the printed documentation. But then it led off to the hub of the microsite, where everyone got fair access to the more detailed information. So yeah, we can use print, but in a lighter touch way that just sort of opens the door, opens the conversation to then lead on to that sort of central hub of information. And Mel, if you've got anything to add in terms of what you did to lay the foundations and learn more about your global audience.
We relied really heavily on our local HR partners. So in getting to know, even down to what language they wanted to have the communications in. One of the interesting things was in Poland, we were trying to decide whether to communicate in English or in Polish. And our local people partner said to us, a lot of these people understand the term share award, vest, just from spending so much time talking to their UK colleagues, and they're not necessarily terms that they would understand in Polish. So even little things like that, our local people partners were really, really key in understanding how the local populations wanted to be communicated to.
Yeah, absolutely. And both of you have interestingly touched on the same point around giving enough information to your local support team to empower them to have their conversations. So conversations haven't necessarily got to go direct to each individual. It's mixing it up, and actually it could be through the managers or the people teams in local jurisdictions. So it's good to have a mix of both, really. So we'll move on to our final tip in tip 8, which is storytelling.
Yes, storytelling. This is one of the strongest weapons we have, is to tell story. You think we're told fables, we're told tales when we're very young. We're told these for a reason. They've always got a message at the end, and stories are like Velcro for the brain. Again, we won't go into neuroscience, but stories have the ability to turn cold, hard facts into something really memorable. That's why a message from a CEO, like we looked at Kingfisher and Ocado, taking employees through their share plan journey is excellent. Or it could be an employee talking about their share plan experience. This really helps get your message to stick. However, little caveat, this isn't the end of the story. Pun not intended, but it's actually the start, because what we're aiming to do is inspire conversations. This is the goal. We want people to engage with your communications, and then they can talk about their experiences or ask questions. So if your end goal is to aim for discussions as opposed to purely focusing on take-up rates, if you go for the discussions, the take-up rate's going to take care of themselves. What you're trying to do by using stories as a platform to then let other people tell their stories is it turns the topic, which is share plans, it turns it into something that's part of the business's DNA. So this works far better than a traditional top-down approach to share plans, which I'm sure a lot of people have seen. And it's if you think emails or a handful of emails and a presentation is going to win hearts and minds, it's not going to. Over a long-term period, which share plans are, it's not a short-term fix. You need to keep the conversation going. So the more you can do that by using storytelling to ignite that conversation, the better.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's all about us actually trying to be facilitators. And I think we're comfortable about delivering information, but actually we've got to get comfortable with encouraging people to have conversations, because we've only got limited amount of time and resource. So that's why we end up being quite functional, and we only communicate when there's an activity. So if there's an award, if there's a vesting, that's when we happen to talk. But actually there's a lot of space in between. So if we can facilitate conversation, then colleagues will naturally talk, learn, and become better at understanding the share plan in those gaps, because they're having natural conversations about it, and it's, as you say, part of the DNA and culture of that business. So I'm particularly keen to pass over to Alison on this point, because I know you've got ambitions for this year and how you've managed to launch your plan and what your intentions are for this year.
Yeah, thanks, Chrissy. I'm really excited about this. We have a lot of people that are now participants of this plan, and I feel there's a real duty for us to do the right thing by them and to educate them and to fill in those gaps, as Chrissy described. Clearly, of course, we're going to do the comms around, the big events, the purchase, the vesting, the exercise, all of those kind of things. But for me, there's a huge opportunity. So we are planning on about a 6-week rotation. We're planning a comms event. So to give you a bit of an idea, first one will be something around share price. So what actually is a share price? What causes a share price to move? What does it mean if the share price goes up? What does it mean if the share price goes down? Is it because the company's doing well or not doing well? So all of those kind of things in a very succinct, we're talking 1 page, we're not talking 50 pages of detail, but just to start to get people to understand what that means. We're then going to build on that knowledge and link that to all of the corporate communications as we go forward, so half-year results, the full-year results, and anchor that back to the share plan for people so they understand how that fits. We're also hoping to do something a little bit later in the year around the AGM. We're conscious of the fact that a lot of people don't really know what an AGM is, what the point is, what role, if any, that they can play in it. A lot of our colleagues clearly won't necessarily attend our AGM, but we're thinking of working with the chairman to do, if you like, an internal version of the AGM for colleague shareholders, and really keep building that. And it's really important to me that we make sure that we don't just say, great, you've joined now, therefore nothing much is going to happen for the next few months, and that we make sure that we keep that education going and make sure that this is a really positive journey for people. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's really nice to hear that. So thanks for sharing that. I think with the backdrop of Section 172 and making sure that we've got clear engagement with colleagues, I think the share plan, the world of share plans is a great way of achieving this. But yeah, we'll hit milestones like AGMs and year ends, and there are great opportunities, as Alison's alluded to actually re-engage and get some communications out around that. So that they better understand the full journey. So yeah, that's.
Chrissy, I think you inadvertently muted yourself there for a moment.
I did. I clicked away, clicking happy there. So yeah, I think that takes us nicely on to the Q&A section now that we've done our 8 top tips.
Smashing. Thanks very much indeed. That was really interesting, actually, a stimulating conversation, and plenty of food for thought for everyone there. And I'm particularly interested in to see the result of the AGM sessions, because my understanding is typically with a share plan, fewer than 5% of participants actually take up the option to vote on the resolutions at an AGM. So it'll be really interesting to see whether those figures are increased following this initiative. But I suppose the main question on everyone's lips, or maybe their fingertips if they're typing away in this instance, is how did these launches actually go? What was the outcome? Were they successful? And what were the all-important take-up rates? So Alison, if I can come to you first, how did it all pan out at Kingfisher?
Yeah, great. I have to say, though, take-up rate wasn't actually a key success criteria for us. And I think it's important just to expand on that. We felt with such a wide population and with a lot of people on minimum wage and people with potentially not a huge amount of disposable income, it was really important to us that people didn't join the plan if it wasn't the right plan for them. So our goal, if you like, our key success criteria was that if people didn't join the plan, that was entirely okay. But I wanted them not to join the plan because they understood how the plan worked and they made a conscious and educated decision that it wasn't the right thing for them, as opposed to it just got into it's too difficult, it's too complicated, I don't really understand, I'm never going to be a shareholder, it's not for me. The feedback that we've had so far from both people that have joined and haven't joined has been really positive. We ended up with just shy of 10,000 people joining, which we think is a great result. We are optimistic that if we then build and launch this plan again, that we will, that those numbers will grow significantly, because you'll get people talking to each other. The early adopters will talk to people that perhaps didn't join, and they will have a go second time round. And clearly the onus is on us to make it a great experience and to keep the education going and everything else.
Absolutely, and the all-important role of the local champions comes into play second time round too. And Mel, if I can ask the same question to you, you obviously had a smaller eligible population. What were your results, and how were they viewed by you and the team at Ocado?
So I think the ask from Ocado, interestingly enough, on me was to make the plan available to everyone outside the UK and to make it understood. And we never actually settled on a take-up that we wanted. It was purely a case of it needs to be available to them. They need to understand it. Personally, I was hoping that take-up would be higher than 37%, and that's from a plan in my history. It's a number that stuck with me. And the take-up that we had on this plan was 62%, which I must say I was absolutely delighted with.
Very good, great figures, absolutely. I'm very conscious of the time, but we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left, and we have had a question from John Bendel, one of the delegates here, and his question is, how do you communicate change equally to different markets if they are often unwired? I'm not entirely sure what unwired means in this respect, but I wonder whether it refers to a specific phrase used a little earlier.
I'm going to assume it's people who don't have email access or access to computers.
That would make sense. Yes.
And I guess we did allude to that earlier with Alison and the Kingfisher example, really. So majority of employees not having access to a work email address. So I think it's about coming back to harnessing the power of print. It's interesting when you've seen what changes have occurred in 2020 with the use of QR codes. So it's using things like this to connect the use of paper to digital. So you can say less on the print and have easy access to open your camera and use the QR code to shift across to digital in their own time, perhaps with sharing the information with family and those involved.
It's more, obviously it's more complicated with the pandemic than it would be normally, because usually you would assume that these employees are working together in whether it was a factory of some sort or somewhere where they're more manual and they're not sitting in front of a laptop. What I would always try to do is use the middle management to tell the rest of the team the message. So give them briefing papers that are really clear and concise. So it makes it really easy for them in huddles that they have to actually read the information to them, because that middle management is often overlooked, but they spend the most time communicating with their team. So you really need to harness that. As long as you start with a communication strategy where you list all of your key messages and everything that you want to communicate to your people, then work out what channel is best for them and repurpose that information for the right channel. So if people want to use GIFs and videos, take that information and repurpose it for that channel. But if they don't have access to videos and GIFs and emails, turn it into briefing packs, or it could be letters or print, and deliver it that way. But it really depends on the audience and what channel is available to them.
Excellent, thank you, Graham, for that. I'm really sorry, but we do need to wrap up now. If you do have any questions you'd like us to ask of both Mel and Alison, our guest speakers, or Chrissy and Graham at Eximia, please drop us a note to the team@proshare.org email address, and we'll make sure they are answered either directly to you or potentially in the next newsletter. But before we do wrap up for today, a couple of dates for your diary. The ProShare Annual Awards, the virtual ceremony, which is on Thursday, 25th of February, all kicks off at 5:30, straight after you all finish work. So make sure you bring a large glass of something sparkly. The deadline for submissions was close of business last night, and we have had an absolutely tremendous response. You can register now for the ceremony via our website at proshare.org, and there was also a link on our latest newsletter, which came out on Monday. It's free to attend and it's open to all. And if you do attend, please make sure you stay around for the after party too. Secondly, we also have a brand new series of webinar conversations, Refresh, Tea Time with Janet. You might have seen a few more pictures of tea and biscuits on LinkedIn than you're used to. This is because we have Janet Cooper, best known for her work in setting up Tapestry compliance, coming along and joining us at ProShare, and she will be holding a series of conversations covering both share plan related topics and also much broader topics such as mental health, diversity and racism, plan for the future, and managing your career. Now, the first of these is very, very soon. It's actually on Monday, the 8th of February. And this will be Janet in conversation with Andrew Ninian, Director of Stewardship and Corporate Governance at the Investment Association, and Amy Wilson of Federated Hermes. And they will be talking with Janet about all things ESG, which, as I'm sure you're all aware, is very much a hot topic right now. And then on Tuesday, the 16th of February, Janet will be talking with Nikki Denby, partner at Stork and May, about best ways of managing your career. Now, we'll be issuing an email with full details shortly to everybody who's on our newsletter distribution list, but please also keep an eye out on our LinkedIn page for registration details. Right, okay, I'm aware we are at the time we need to wrap up. So just time again to say thank you very much to our hosts and our guest speakers. So Chrissy Davis and Graham Cook at Eximia, thank you. Mel Keegan from Ocado Group PLC, thank you very much. And Alison Burstall at Kingfisher PLC, thank you too. And also not forgetting, thank you to Jess and Nikki for logistics and technical support. Thank you all for now, and goodbye and have good afternoons. Thank you.
Bye everyone.
Take care.